A Nobel Prize winner stood before the world and gave credit to one person. He never said her name. For 3 years, nobody knew who she was. Then Stephen Colbert turned a screen around, and a 77-year-old woman sitting in a guest chair saw something that made her press both hands flat against her chest and stop breathing entirely. This is that story. It was a Tuesday night at the Late Show. November in New York, the kind of cold that arrives without warning and makes the city feel purposeful, intentional, like it has somewhere important to be. Inside the Ed Sullivan Theater, the lights were warm and the band was loose, and the audience was the particular kind of happy that comes from being inside somewhere bright when the world outside has gone gray. Stephen walked out to his mark the way he always did, jacket buttoned, glasses on, already smiling at something private, the show running in his head before the cameras confirmed it was real. The audience gave him the welcome they always gave him, and he gave it right back. That specific Late Show energy that takes years to build and looks effortless because of it. Nobody in that room was thinking about a Nobel Prize. Nobody was thinking about a classroom in Baltimore from 45 years ago. Nobody was thinking about a question. They would be before the night was over. The guest was not famous. That needs to be said plainly because it matters. Gloria Sims was 77 years old, recently retired after 45 years of teaching second and third grade at a public elementary school in Baltimore, Maryland. She had never written a book. She had never given a TED Talk. She had never been on television. She had come to the Late Show because a producer named Andrea had grown up in Baltimore, had a cousin who went to Gloria's school, and had heard the story secondhand at a family dinner 2 Thanksgivings ago and written it on a napkin and kept the napkin in her desk drawer until the right moment arrived. The right moment, Andrea had decided, was now. Gloria arrived at the theater by train. She wore a burgundy blazer over a white blouse, dark slacks, low heels, a small silver brooch on her lapel, a shape that, if you looked closely, was a pencil. Her hair was silver and cut short. Her hands, when she folded them in her lap in the green room, were the hands of someone who had spent decades writing on chalkboards and holding small shoulders steady and pointing at things worth looking at. She was not nervous. She had stood in front of rooms full of people who didn't want to be there for 45 years. A television studio was just a room. She accepted the offer of tea. She looked around the green room with the calm, assessing gaze of a woman who spent her career reading environments quickly. What's in here? What's missing? What does this place need? When the production assistant asked if she needed anything else, Gloria said, "Is Stephen nervous before these things?" The assistant said, "A little every time." Gloria nodded, satisfied. "Good," she said. "That's how you know it still matters to him." Stephen had done his homework, as he always did. He knew that Gloria Sims had taught at the same school for 45 years without a single year's break. He knew that she had a waiting list of parents who specifically requested her classroom. He knew that her central, defining method, the thing she had built her entire career around, was not reading, not arithmetic, not any specific subject at all. It was questions. Gloria Sims taught children how to ask questions. Not just any questions, the right questions. The kind that open things up instead of closing them down. The kind that send you somewhere you didn't expect to go. She had a wall in her classroom, changed every year, covered entirely in questions her students had asked. Not answers, questions. The wall was called, simply, the wall of not yet. Because the question, Gloria believed, was always more important than the answer. The answer was a destination. The question was the whole journey. This philosophy had been in her classroom for 45 years, applied to hundreds of children, quietly and without recognition, the way most important things are applied. Until 3 years ago. 3 years ago, a man named Dr. James Ackafer stood at a podium in Stockholm, Sweden, and accepted the Nobel Prize in Medicine for his work on early neurological development in children. Specifically, his research into how the act of questioning shapes the developing brain in ways that were previously unmeasured and largely unconsidered. His acceptance speech ran 14 minutes. 12 of those minutes were about the science. The last 2 were about a classroom. He did not name the school. He did not name the city. He said only this near the end, quietly and with the particular gravity of a man who has been waiting a long time to say something out loud. There was a teacher. I was 7 years old and I did not know how to want things yet. She taught me that a question was a form of courage, that asking why or what if or I wonder was not a sign of ignorance but a sign of hunger. I have been hungry ever since. Everything I have done, every question my lab has asked, every answer we have found, it began in her classroom. I owe her a debt I have no way to repay. I hope she knows. He did not say her name. The speech was watched 40 million times. For 3 years people searched. Journalists tried. Fans of Dr. Achafer wrote articles speculating. Someone started a Reddit thread that reached 200,000 upvotes. Nobody found her. Because Gloria Sims did not have a social media presence, did not have a website, did not have an agent or a publicist or a platform of any kind. She had a classroom, and then she retired, and she went home to her apartment in Baltimore and watered her plants and read and was content in the way of someone who has done what they came to do. She had watched the Nobel speech once, alone in her living room on a Tuesday night in December. She had recognized the words immediately. She had sat very still for a long time. Then she had turned off the television, washed her dinner dishes, and gone to bed. She had not told anyone. Not because she was modest, though she was, but because the recognition was already complete internally, privately. She knew. He knew, in whatever way the universe allows knowing across distance and time. That felt like enough. It had felt like enough for 3 years. Until Andrea found her. Here is where the story splits, and both halves must be carried together. The first half. Gloria Sims had given 45 years to other people's children. 45 years of arriving early and leaving late, of learning names and faces and the specific fears of 7-year-olds, of finding the question inside each child that unlocked the rest of them. She had done this without tenure, without significant salary, without the kind of recognition that gets buildings named after you. She had done it because the work itself was the point, because watching a child discover that their curiosity had value was sufficient reward, year after year, for as long as she could stand in a room and make it happen. She had never needed to be thanked. She had never expected to be found. The second half. Dr. James Achafer, Nobel laureate, had been in Gloria's classroom for 1 year. 2nd grade, 1979. He remembered her with the particular clarity reserved for people who changed the direction of your life before you were old enough to understand what direction meant. His Nobel speech had been, among other things, a 40-year delayed thank you delivered to a woman he had lost track of entirely, whom he had searched for briefly and unsuccessfully, and whom he had eventually concluded he would never find. He had made peace with that. He had not entirely made peace with that. Stephen opened the conversation gently, the way he opened all conversations that mattered, not with the big question, but with the small ones that build toward it. He asked Gloria about Baltimore. She talked about the city the way people talk about places that raised them, with clear eyes, without sentimentality, naming the specific things that were true. He asked about the school. She described the building. Old, underfunded, perpetually in need of paint, and filled every September with children who arrived not knowing yet what they were capable of. "What did you teach them?" Stephen asked. "2nd grade, reading, math, the usual." "That's not what I heard," Stephen said. Gloria looked at him steadily, a small smile, the smile of a woman who has been seen through before and doesn't mind it. "I taught them to ask," she said. "Everything else followed from that." "Why question specifically?" She was quiet for a moment. When she spoke, It was with the precision of someone who has thought about something for so long that the thinking has become the answer. Because a child who knows how to ask a question is never lost, she said. They might be confused, they might be scared, they might not know where they are. But if they can form the question, if they can look at what they don't understand and say, what is this? Why does it work this way? What happens if, then they have the tool? The tool is everything. The answer is just what you find when you use it. The studio was leaning in, the particular quiet of 300 people who have just heard something true. Stephen nodded slowly. Did you ever wonder, he said, where your students went after they left your classroom? Always, she said simply. You send them out and you never really know. That's the job. You give them something and you trust it travels. And if it did travel, if you found out it had further than you imagined? Gloria looked at him carefully, the look of a woman whose instincts were working. Is there something you want to show me, Stephen? Stephen smiled. There is. He had not told her what it was. The production team had debated this for 2 weeks. Some felt she should be warned, given context, prepared. Andrea had argued against it. She spent 45 years reading rooms, Andrea said. She'll know something is coming the moment she sits down, but the moment itself, that should be hers, unmanaged. Stephen had agreed. Now he nodded to the production booth. The main monitor behind his desk, usually dark during guest segments, lit up. A video began to play. Stockholm, December. A man at a podium in a dark suit, the Nobel medal catching the light. Gloria turned to look at the screen. She knew the speech. She had watched it once alone 3 years ago. She watched it again now. 12 minutes of science she didn't follow precisely, but understood in shape and direction. The same shape and direction she had pointed children toward for decades, one question at a time. Then the last 2 minutes. There was a teacher. The studio was completely silent. Everyone watching Gloria watched the screen. Her face in profile, composed, still, the same controlled expression she had brought into the room. Until the last sentence. I hope she knows. Something moved across Gloria Simms' face. Not a collapse, nothing so dramatic, more like a door opening. Quietly on its own, because the thing behind it had been pressing gently for 3 years and the latch had finally given. She pressed both hands flat against her chest. She did not look away from the screen. When the video ended, the studio held its silence for a long moment. Then Stephen said, very quietly, He's been looking for you, Gloria. She turned back to him. Her eyes were full but steady. I know, she said. I watched this alone in my living room 3 years ago. You never told anyone. No. Why? She looked at her hands, those hands that had held chalk and small shoulders and 45 years of pencils. Because it was already enough, she said. Knowing was already enough. I didn't need the world to know. Stephen let that sit. Then, can I tell you something? She nodded. He's here. The door to the side of the stage opened. Dr. James Ackeffer walked out. 63 years old, tall, silver at his temples, the Nobel medal knot around his neck. He had left that in Stockholm, he would later say, because this moment was not about the medal, wearing a dark suit, walking with the deliberate pace of a man who has been waiting to do something for a very long time. He stopped in front of Gloria. She stood up from the guest chair. Without thinking, automatically, the way she had stood up for 45 years when something important entered the room. They looked at each other. Gloria Simms and the 7-year-old boy who had sat in the 3rd row of her 2nd-grade classroom in Baltimore in 1979, who had not yet known how to want things, who had learned in her room that a question was a form of courage, and had been asking ever since. Mrs. Simms, he said. His voice was steady but carrying something enormous underneath it. James, she said, as if no time had passed, as if he were still 7 and she were still standing at the front of the room and the distance between then and now were simply a question waiting to be asked. He took both her hands in his, large hands around small ones. "I looked for you," he said. "I know. I couldn't find you. I know that too. I needed you to know the speech wasn't enough. The speech was for everyone. This," he stopped, started again. "This is for you." He reached into his jacket pocket and produced a folded piece of paper, handwritten, dense with words, front and back. "I wrote this the night I won," he said. "Before the ceremony, before the speech. I wrote what I actually wanted to say, everything I couldn't say at a podium in Stockholm. I've been carrying it for 3 years." He placed it in her hands. The studio was absolutely silent, not the silence of held breath, deeper than that. The silence of people who understand they are inside a moment that will not come again. Gloria held the letter, did not open it, looked up at James. "You remembered the wall," she said. "The wall of not yet," he said immediately. "Every question we ever had that didn't have an answer yet. I thought about that wall for 40 years. My entire lab is that wall." She smiled, the full, unguarded smile of a woman who has just been told that the thing she believed in was worth believing in. "Then I did my job," she said. "You did," he said. "You did it perfectly." Stephen, who had not moved from his position behind the desk for the last 4 minutes, finally spoke. "Gloria," he said, 45 years, hundreds of students. You sent them all out and trusted the questions would travel. Did you ever imagine?" "No," she said simply. "You don't imagine, you just teach, and then you trust." "And if you could go back to that classroom, 1979, second grade, knowing what you know now, would you do anything differently?" She thought about this genuinely, the way she had always thought about things, not for the audience, not for the camera, but because the question deserved a real answer. "I'd have a bigger wall," she said. The audience laughed, not the polite laugh of a talk show, but the laugh of recognition, of relief, of 300 people releasing something they'd been holding. James laughed too. Stephen laughed, pressing one hand flat on the desk, the laugh of someone who has just been given exactly what he needed. The episode aired the following Thursday. The clip of James walking through the door, 9 seconds, no music, no build-up, just a man and a woman and 45 years of distance closing, was shared more than any late show clip in 4 years. Not because it was produced, because it wasn't. Gloria opened James's letter that night, alone in her hotel room, before she took the train back to Baltimore. She read it twice, then folded it back along its original creases and placed it in the inside pocket of her burgundy blazer, against her chest, next to the pencil brooch. She has not shared its contents. When asked, she says only, "It's a very good letter. He always was a good writer. I taught him that too." James returned to his lab the following Monday. On the wall above the whiteboard where his team had always written their current questions, he added a new line at the top, permanent marker, block letters. "What don't we know yet?" His team asked him where it came from. "Second grade," he said, and left it at that. Stephen kept his notes from that night, 3 handwritten pages, margins full. He has said in interviews that Gloria's answer, "You don't imagine, you just teach, and then you trust," is the answer he thinks about most when he's asked why he does the show. "Because you send it out," he said, "and you trust it travels." Gloria Sims taught 45 years of children that a question was a form of courage. She sent them out into the world and trusted the questions would travel. One of them traveled to Stockholm. One of them traveled back. And somewhere in Baltimore, there is still a wall changed every year, filled with what children do not yet know, that has been, all along, the beginning of everything.